new evidence for the shroud since 1988. For anyone who has eyes to see, the Holy Shroud covered the body of Jesus. So it is from the 1st century that evidence is found to establish the correct meteorological dating of the cloth. Any artifact designed for a purpose and marking is made and measured according to the standard units prevailing at the time of production. Therefore, to recover the unit used to measure the shroud will establish its origin and age. The shroud cloth measures with accuracy and precision 8 by 2 Jewish cubits, resulting in perfect integers. This Jewish and Assyrian cubic length was given the classification of 21.4 inches by a pioneer of scientific archaeology, William Winters Petrie. And it is in the Petrie Museum, London, that 3 intact wooden examples of this cubic unit were deposited by him. One of these rods is now on loan at the Science Museum, London. And this example, slide, Avanti, gives a good illustration of the divisions of the cubit. The rod is divided into 6 palms, and each palm is 4 digits. This cubit has a mean palm of 3.555 inches, giving the calculated length of 6 palms as 21.33 inches. The 2 rods in the Petrie Museum, Avanti, the upper rod in the cabinet has a mean palm of 3.518 inches, giving the calculated length of 6 palms as 21.11 inches. Now the lower cubit. This has the owner's name of around 2,000 years ago. It's signed on one end of the rod. Avanti. In Greek, Anuti. Avanti. The use of Greek clearly places the rod in the Greco-Roman era, and its known provenance is Near East. The mean palm is 3.555 inches, giving the calculated length of 6 palms as 21.33 inches. When the mean of these 3 cubic examples is multiplied by 8 and by 2, Avanti, the mean result is 8 cubits equals 170 inches. 2 cubits equals 42.5 inches, i.e. exactly the same dimensions as the shroud. The 1978 reading being length circa 171 inches, width 43 inches. The 1988 reading is length circa 169.3 inches, width 42.5 inches, giving the mean length of 170.15 inches and width 42.75 inches. The figures underlined in red on the diagram match metrologically and archaeologically. The results provide conclusive evidence that the age of the linen of the Shroud of Turin is ancient and not medieval. The artifacts, that is, the cubits and the shroud, are from the same period of history and from the same province, the Near East. Therefore, the shroud was measured with a Jewish cubit prior to April AD 33. Next, we have the reason why the side strip is part of the shroud. Because the shroud was originally prepared to a standard width of 2 cubits, the cloth was made up to this requirement. Seams were used to join strips to form larger sheets and to add extensions. The side strip is therefore an intended integral part of the shroud. The outer edge of the side strip is reported to have selvage. in which case the side strip was added during manufacture to fulfill the merchant standard of 2 cubits. The width of the main cloth aligned with the unit, the Assyrian Great U. When this is subtracted from the shroud width of double the principal standard Assyrian cubit, the difference between the measures equals the width of the side strip. The Assyrian Great U equals 39.94 inches. The Assyrian cubit equals 21.37 inches. As the shroud was originally a complete rectangle, then the 2 missing corners at the ends of the side strip have obviously been removed, and for this reason, to become smaller part relics. There is historical record that parts of the shroud were preserved in relic collections. For example, in that received by St. Louis and placed in his Sainte-Chapelle in Paris around 1248. And in the 17th century engraving of the Great Shrine of Antibes, a relic is recorded, number 17, and further described in an infantry as a Sindone Domini. The possibility of a fragment surviving from one of the 2 missing corners of the shroud led me to Pamplona Cathedral, Spain, where is preserved the reliquary of the Holy Sepulchre of Antibes. Thought to be late 13th century and clearly a copy of the Great Shrine of Sainte-Chapelle. The main contents of the reliquary is cloth associated with the burial of Antibes. The shroud is portrayed over the side of the tomb. The crystal top is 4.7 by 1.4 inches. And on the far right, in the tomb, there is linen cloth. But this piece does not show a twill weave. But there is another small piece of rolled-up cloth obscured behind, which is still to be identified and is being clarified. So this is one area of research that may eventually locate a fragment of the side strip in some forgotten corner of a reliquary. And the evidence so far indicates that these missing parts were removed from the shroud before 1204. Next, how the shroud was kept and folded before its appearance in the array during the 1350s. The damage that has left burn marks on the shroud in a series of holes increasing in size and depicted on the Belgian copy of 1516 were created before the shroud reached Geoffrey de Charne of Antibes. As you can see from the diagrams, the shroud folds up to diagram E. With the burn holes within an area of circa 21.25 by 9.4 inches. Points Y and X are also burn holes on the edge of the folded shroud, sustained at the same time. Observe diagram A, point X. On the dorsal image, this marks the first and second layer burn holes. Point X on the frontal image is the third layer burn mark. The burn X can be seen on the shroud center line of Antibes. Point X, first and second layer burns on the dorsal image, i.e. burns on both sides of the longitudinal fold. Point X of Antibes. On the frontal image is the third layer burn, and this has left a small mark just below the image of the hands. The shroud folded as in figure 10 diagram E of Antibes. Diagram E was placed in a convenient-sized reliquary of circa 23.5 by 11.5 by 4 inches and stain the burn damage marks in this situation. Immediately after Dishani acquired the shroud, it is possible that he decided to make a new reliquary because the previous one was damaged in some way. And here there is a possible link with the 1349 fire at Besançon Cathedral. But before this, there were other fires to which the shroud was known to be in close proximity. The shroud disappeared in Constantinople in 1204, and prior to this, there had been several conflagrations that destroyed large sections of the city during the Crusader attacks. The shroud, no longer kept in the Edessa reliquary, was probably put in the 23.5 by 11.5 inch casket for safety and convenience, and it could have been caught in one of these fires, but whichever fire did the damage, it was certainly before it reached Lire. It can be seen, diagram F, diagram F, that the shroud was folded to a similar convenient size when it was again damaged by a fire in 1532. And this folding represents the shape of the reliquary that held the cloth. The reliquary damaged in the 1532 fire was that presented in 1509. And this 1509 reliquary replaced the Dishani reliquary of the same size. The 1532 folding is proportionately identical to the shape of the Dishani reliquary, diagram F, and the shape of the Dishani reliquary is found on the Lire pilgrim medal of Antioch. The box-shaped receptacle in the centre of the medal could represent both the tomb and the reliquary. This receptacle proportionately matches a calculated casket size of circa 16 by 12.5 by 5 inches, the size used to keep the shroud till 1532. The shroud arrived in Constantinople in 944 in a reliquary that eventually found its way to Sainte-Chapelle, Paris of Antioch. It is reliquary number 18 in the Great Shrine engraving. It is described in the Sainte-Chapelle inventories as the face of our Lord, an effigy inside the reliquary with a trellis against the picture. It is the Edessa image. The effigy could have been a protective cover, an icon representation of what lay behind, or a replica of what was once kept there. The cloth was originally placed in the casket so that the face was central of Antioch. Here the shroud folds to 21.25 by 14 inches and fits perfectly inside the Sainte-Chapelle casket of 23.5 by 16 by 3 inches. These casket dimensions are recorded in a Sainte-Chapelle inventory of 1740 and on the engraving. To achieve the folding in the Edessa image reliquary, the cloth was folded to 1/8 of its length, and there are several ways of doing this, leaving the face area on one side. From the folding of 42.5 by 21.25 inches, the shroud was divided into three equal parts, two of these parts folding behind the face. It then fits exactly inside the Edessa reliquary. The Edessa image in Sainte-Chapelle then was a reliquary that once contained the shroud, and this was the most obvious and practical way of conserving the cloth. And before 944 it was preserved and kept in Edessa, and it is there that another link with the shroud is found, Syriac, the language of Jesus, i.e. Aramaic. There is only space to give the main points from the tabulation of Antioch. The Syriac manuscripts have the actual word for shroud, Yalta, the red on the diagram. Its root meaning is enclosed, surrounded, girded around, i.e. doubled around, in order to strengthen, press closer. And this applies exactly to the shroud as we know it. From the alignment of the Greek and Syriac manuscripts, it can be seen that the Greek sinden is equated with the Syriac singular katana, linen, with the addition of hiyasa, shroud, in Matthew and Luke in the Peshitta manuscripts, and by only shroud in Luke, Old Syriac. But in John and Luke, orthonia is always equated with the Syriac plural ketane, linens, with one manuscript exception, and that is probably because the scribe forgot to add the plural sign. Therefore, sinden in the Greek manuscripts represents the shroud, and orthonia in John and Luke represents linens, of which the shroud There remains the Sudarium, which does not align with the shroud, but with the Syriac Sudara, headcloth. And this is found in John both for Lazarus and inside the Holy Sepulchre. Because the Syriac Gospel writers were native Aramaic speakers, the Syriac Gospels are of prime importance. And here is the 2nd or 3rd century Curetonian Old Syriac manuscript, now in the British Library, opened at Luke 23, verse 53, with the very word shroud, hiyasa, in the text. It reads, and wrapped it in a shroud. Hiyasa. Now the reason why the face of the shroud appears detached from the body. When the cloth was originally wrapped around the top of the head, an appropriate crease resulted at the crown, and a further transverse crease was made that runs just below the base of the shin. The cloth was deliberately creased to help the linen stay in place. When the shroud is observed laid out flat, it has the effect of moving the head away from the body by about 1.5 inches. Conclusive evidence that this is how the shroud was wrapped around the head is found in the creases across the neck, which have appeared on portrait copies from the 6th century, but they were not understood by the artists. They appear in one transverse line below the base of the neck in portraits of Christ. This double crease line was produced when the shroud was fitted around the larynx, creating a double crease under the Adam's apple, in the form of a concave line opposite another image crease line, convex, over the top of the larynx. There are the convex lines over the larynx, and there's the mark there showing the top of the Adam's apple. Thus, the image of the Adam's apple is recorded on the shroud. There is not space to give all the details here, but shroud cloth was deliberately left under the shin, but unwrapped from the sides of the head and body. The image was formed when the sides of the shroud were held out either side of the face and at the feet by 2 assistants. The cloth under the shin was not disturbed, otherwise the image would have distorted. The whole image was planned and predictable, and was formed when the shroud was held in the correct position. At the very instant